Alright, what is up, guys? I'm Dodger, and I'm here to start sort of a series of content that I've wanted to make for a couple weeks or so for MSEM. And today's video is going to be kind of a deck building stream of consciousness sort of thing. So I want to go into how I build decks, what my philosophy around building decks is, and kind of like give you some insight into like what I'm thinking about when I'm building a certain deck and how you can apply that to your own deck building process. Yeah, so let's get started. So the two cards that I'm going to be looking at today are going to be two cards that we talked about as number 10 on the list of the podcast that I did with Pipsqueak and Canterbury Egg. And that podcast was about the 10 most busted MSEM cards that don't really see any play. And although these are only number 10 on the list, I think we all agreed that really the main thing holding these cards back is that no one's really found the proper shell for them yet. So I'm going to take a look at these cards and see if I can't find, some way to kind of finagle everything and get it together. Now, I'm going into this completely blind. So just saying, like, I haven't thought about what I'm going to do in this video yet, and hopefully I'm going to get through the whole thing without needing to edit it. So there may be a bit of me, like, thinking along the way, and I'll try to think out loud, of course, but just, like, bear with me. So I'm going to go over these cards real quick, what they do. Seismic Colossus is, as you can see, an 8-drop, 5/5 with Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, and Haste, so that's pretty solid for 8 mana. It's not the kind of card that we're willing to ramp to 8 mana for, but this Concord ability, it will cost only 4 mana to cast if you have 4 or more card types among permanents you control. Now, this is obviously very, very broken. If you can get this to 4 mana reliably early enough, like turn 4 or 5, this card is going to win you the game if it doesn't get immediately removed or countered. Now here we've got Sights Beyond, which is one blue for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you scry 3, and it has a Concord ability at the beginning of your upkeep. If you have 4 more card types among permanents you control, you draw a card. So obviously both of these cards are very, very, very strong if you can reliably get that Concord enabled. And the good news is that Sights Beyond is an enchantment itself, and that means dropping an early Sights Beyond is actually going to go a lot towards getting your Concord online, because that means that you're going to be able to easily that just means, like, yeah, you kind of get what I'm saying. So the tools that I'm going to be using for building this deck are going to be this handy website, MSEM Instigator. I'm also going to pull up another handy tool called the MSEM Compendium. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but in case you're not, it's located on the website under this Resources tab. It's just a Google Doc that collects all of the cards that, like, are kind of generically good, and then some that are also, like, just good. It's by no means, like, it's not a definitive list of every card that's playable in the format, but it is a pretty solid reference point, especially if you're just looking for cards you might need in a certain slot that don't necessarily, like that could go in a lot of decks, right? So anyway, we're not going to be using this primarily, but this is a good additional resource for us to be like, okay, I need, like, something specific here. Is there anything in here that can fit that spot in my curve? And the last tool we're going to be using is going to be Lackey's CCG. I find Lackey's deck builder much easier to use than Cockatrice personally. For reasons I won't really get into. Cockatrice requires you to, like, move your mouse a lot more to move stuff around, and what I like to... you'll see in a minute how I use Lackey to deck build. So, another thing about Instigator is that working knowledge of how Instigator works can make it a lot easier for you to find cards that do a certain thing that you're looking for. So I'll go into a quick tutorial of, like, how Instigator works, basically. The base search terms are going to get you any card with the string that you type in its name. So if I type, I don't know, I did this the other day. If I type my last name Hajir, I'm gonna get 3 cards from Tabaq, which all have my last name in them. So that's kind of funny. But now, and as you saw in this previous search, I ended up returning this with Seismic Colossus or Sites Beyond. So this use of parentheses allows us to add multiple clauses to our search criteria that basically let you refine your search a lot more. So let's say when I'm looking at this Concord stuff, right, I want cards that can potentially get me multiple types of permanents at once. Because we can assume that we have lands, right? And if we can land an early Sites Beyond, that's an enchantment, and really after that we just need 2 more, right? So let's look at, so for example, if I wanted to see if there were like all the artifact creatures, I would just do type artifact and type creature. Now obviously this is a lot of cards, right? We have like 183 cards. We don't want to sort through all of these. Like, our first result is like, okay, that's obviously no, obviously no, obviously no, right? So first of all, we'd want something that we can cast before turn 4, ideally, because we want to be able to get the Seismic Colossus online. So what we're just going to do is we're just going to do CMC less than or equal to 3. And now this will refine our search a little more, right? I'm also going to sort it by reverse converted mana cost, so I can just sort through here. Now, I'm also going to do one more thing, which is I'm going to limit the search to non-commons. So this little syntax here is I'm saying not rarity is common. And just the reason for that is because the vast majority of commons are not going to be MSEM playable, and generally we all know the ones that are. So I'm mostly looking just for like artifacts that are good and I can play in my deck, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. All right, so I'm just gonna scroll real quick through here, and then whenever I see a card that I think might be worth including in the deck, I'm gonna go ahead and head into Lackey. So I'm gonna take my, I know I want to run Sites Beyond, and I know I want to run Seismic Colossus, and I'm not gonna worry about the numbers for now. I'm just gonna put them in the deck. But what I'm actually going to do is utilize these other zones, right? And it's particularly that I like using the hidden zone. So I think Volatile Stonework might be worth potentially running. I'm not like super sold on it or anything, so I'm just going to put it in the hidden zone. This just means it's a card I'm considering. So we can keep going. We're looking through these cards. Okay. Sparking Automaton is interesting. Obviously, it's a good card, right? But we're probably not going to want to be running a lot of artifacts ourselves. So, Spellwork Bulwark seems... I've actually never seen this card before. This card seems kind of weak. Okay, so this is actually another Concord effect, but this card is very, very bad if you don't have Concord, so I'm not going to consider it. So this is actually a little bit of a bummer. I feel like we haven't really hit an artifact creature that's like, yes, I want that in my deck, you know? We've hit like the occasional artifact creature that's like, oh, maybe that'd be okay, but it's certainly not like... Monolithic Golem is interesting. I'm gonna go ahead and throw it in there. I don't think I'll end up running it, but it's possible I'm trying to scroll through this too fast. I'm not like literally reading every card, I'm kind of just like scanning it. So it's possible I missed something. Tinkering Swarm, no. Okay, I'm gonna go back and take a look at the 2-drops, because really, like, what we want to do is we want to follow up the Sites Beyond with the 2-drop, ideally. And we haven't found any 2-drop artifact creatures that we want to run, right? I suppose we could go back to Spellwork Bulwark, right? That's not a bad idea. Potentially, like, I could see a world where maybe we want this. I kind of doubt it, but, like, it's possible. Volto's toolbox. I can also see this potentially being good. Alright, so let's go ahead and we're going to try something else. Now, the 5 different permanent types are land, creature, artifact, enchantment, and planeswalker, right? And we want... So I think it'll probably be prudent for us to include some planeswalkers in this deck. And note that we're only locked into blue. We're not locked into any other color. So I'm going to be looking through pretty much every planeswalker that fits our criteria. So what I want is a planeswalker that... So first of all, I want it to be a planeswalker. I want it to create stuff, right? I want it to make a token. And the reason for this is because I want the planeswalker to... I'm looking for cards that can help fulfill both parts of Concord at once. So a great, like, that's why we were looking at artifact creatures before. So now I'm going to go ahead and just do this search. I'm also going to sort by reverse convert mana cost, just so I can look at the cheaper ones first, because odds are we don't want to play like an 8-mana planeswalker, right? Now I'm looking at these planeswalkers that can create stuff. Petal Weaver Alexa is not really what we want to be doing. You don't actually get to create anything until that. Isle Tizan, definitely not what we want to be doing. Let's see here. I think Liliana at the Brink is interesting. It certainly lets you like stall out a bit, and it does create a couple zombies. I think Liliana at the Brink seems too weak and not enough of what this deck wants to be doing, unfortunately. Mabel Fardancer certainly helps us ramp, but it creates a land, and we already have lands. Mukeef the Grim, not really what we want to be doing, unfortunately. Ryan Zai is interesting. It is a decent card in its own right. It's flexible. I think it's pretty unlikely that we want to run this because we're already running blue, so I'm going to skip over that. This card needs you to be running a lot of enchantments, so I'm going to skip that one too. Yeah, I don't think we really want Romana the Ambassador. Sagaratam, the tokens don't stick around, so we got a lot of... I think Zavid is pretty reasonable. I could see Zavid being run here. I'm going to go ahead and put Zavid in there. Alright, Spellfist Gaijin. We're ideally going to be running mostly permanent spells, so I'm going to skip over Spellfist Gaijin. Zevia of Rotted Woods. This card doesn't really get to create tokens until a long way away. All the Mirror Walker. I think this is potentially usable. We may end up running a fair bit of enchantments, given we already have Sights Beyond in our deck. I could see this being played. Let me go ahead and put that in there. Alright, Acrionos, Redeemed Avenger. This card is not really what we want to be doing. Baltris, Consortiumation, also not what we want to be doing. I think SM Loudguard Champion is actually a great idea because it creates artifact creatures. And that's something that like we are looking for in particular. So I'm going to go ahead and put SM Loudguard Champion in here. Governess, Elizabeth Williams. I haven't seen this card before. I don't really see it. Avenge False God. It can create planes for your opponent, so it doesn't really do what we want. Kalro Desert Outpost. I'm seeing a lot of these cards for the first time. Okay. No, I'm not very convinced by this card. There's a Koth? I did not know we had a Koth. Yeah, it doesn't really do what we want. Lasharador does not do what we want. Sagi Asan. I will pass on that. Okay. I think we're gonna skip the 3. I think so. What we could have done is we could have removed multicolor cards that were not blue. That probably would have been smart. But we're already pretty deep in here, so we're just gonna keep going. I think. I feel like either of these Seto-sans are decent, but not really good enough to consider. Now, this is a great idea, because Volta Hearth is in blue. It creates an artifact creature token repeatedly. SM can only do it once. Volta also has removal and an ultimate that we probably won't end up using. I think Volta Hearth is a great inclusion here, so I'm going to go ahead and put him in there. I know that Volta Construct Consultant. Yeah, this card is not really what we want, I don't think. Okay. Allegra's Titled Master. Now, this is kind of getting to the point where it's like a little too late for us to really care about it. So I'm going to go ahead and... I don't think many of these are really what we're looking for. Now, Headping is interesting, creating enchantment tokens. I think Headping is a pretty weak card overall, though, so I'm not going to consider it. Yeah. Okay. It looks like we're a little bit past... Okay, we're going to go ahead and backtrack a little bit. Now, we still don't know our colors for sure. I haven't found anything that makes me be like, oh, I really got to play this color. I think Savid and SM are both good options for our deck. I also think Volta is pretty much a shoo-in. Okay, so the next kind of task is we want to find cards that can create tokens while also having another effect. Like, say, cards that can investigate or idolize while also having a spell effect, or create a Lotus, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do O idolize, or O investigate, or O Lotus, and we're going to sort that by reverse converted mana cost. So we've got the investigate lands. These are not the worst idea, I think. I think it's like having to sacrifice a land to get the card, to get the artifact, makes it a little awkward because we want to get this early enough that like we'll be able to get the Seismic Colossus out on turn 4, right? So that seems like a little less what we want. We're not going like investigate tribal, so I don't really see this. I think Elegant Strike is, you know, if we do end up in red, this could at the very least be a sideboard option. I'm not too opposed to this. Oops. Yeah. Okay. Force back. Hypnotic Halo. Marshal's Veil. So a lot of these cards are just going to be bad, right? Like, we already know this. I actually forgot there are a lot of Investigate cards. This is actually a pretty long list. Wheat from Chaff is a pretty obvious one. So, I actually was thinking about this card as well. Wilted Lotus is a card that I think is very underrated. It is a cheap artifact. It allows you to ramp. And something that you don't really realize is that Seismic Colossus's Concord cost actually locks in when you decide to cast it. So you can lock in that you're casting Seismic Colossus for Concord, and then sacrifice your only artifact, Wilted Lotus, to help cast it. So potentially we could actually cast a turn 3 Seismic Colossus using Wilted Lotus. It's incredibly unlikely. We'd need Sights Beyond as well, and a 1-drop creature on turn 2. I believe that's the only way we could do it. So it seems fairly far-fetched to do that on turn 3, but like this is still a good card and it can help us get our Colossus early. Okay, so most of these cards are just bad, right? That's just the unfortunate reality of this stuff. I think what we may want to do, I think Lazaire's Altered is actually fairly interesting. You can choose to use it to draw extra cards when you want, and then you can make it give you a Lotus when you want the Lotus. I'm not super sold on it, but I thought it might be... Oh, Prying Inquiry is one that we definitely want. Prying Inquiry. I think Seeker Elizabeth is pretty solid too. As is Still the Pandemonium. Alright. So, Vibrant Rapture is just a generically good card. If we do end up in black, we're probably going to be running some amount of it. I think that we're not likely to be looking at cards that cost more than 2 for this, because we're looking to curve out into this Colossus, right? I'm just going to go ahead and assume we're playing 4 of these. And I'll go into numbers of cards later. Okay. So, like, we may end up changing these later. But for now, I'll just do it like that. Okay, so now I gotta think a little bit about what my next step is, because I need to figure out what colors my deck should be. And part of that is, like, what cards will synergize best with my plan. And my plan is essentially curve out and achieve Concord as quickly as possible, right? I think the next step for me is I'm going to look through the compendium and see if there's anything that jumps out that's like, oh, this is a good card, and it goes well in my deck, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just look through everything. I don't really see anything here. I think Union Rail is actually a decent option. It does count any non-creature spell, which means that like if you cast a Planeswalker or an enchantment or an artifact, like Union Rail will still make creatures from that. So like even though we want to be playing mostly permanents, we can still get value out of Union Rail. Looking through here, this is just red, no, green. Seems unlikely. I don't think any of these. I suppose Elvish Opportunist, if we do end up running green, I think Elvish Opportunist could maybe make the cut. Because it is a creature and makes an artifact. And the artifact actually also ramps you. So actually Elvish Opportunist is not... It's not bad, because you do get to potentially do turn 3 Colossus with this. If you go Sights Beyond, Elvish Opportunist, either on one or like any of those in the first 2 turns, and the Opportunist doesn't get removed. But like, that is pretty powerful. Okay. Ancestral Council is interesting because it can tutor up something like Prying Inquiry or like something else that can make a token. I don't super love it, so I'm gonna leave it behind. Okay. Yeah, there's nothing here that makes me like... Okay, Intrepid is just a good card, and it also is an artifact, so I think Intrepid is pretty much a shoo-in for this deck. Got the right art? Yeah, we'll use that art, yeah. Besides this, not super stoked. I think Yakin's Portal is pretty interesting. It's an enchantment, and it can also become an enchantment creature. This does give us like kind of a secondary win condition. I think Yakin's Portal is worth considering. And if that's the case, we could also consider like a mostly blue deck or like potentially just mono blue deck. So you got Xanagan is good. I don't think this deck is really a Xanagan deck. Ninjaseer's March. It's a good card. It's not really what we want. I think we're pretty unlikely to be playing enough red to trigger it. Slide the Mastermind. I think Iviana, Speaker of Fangs, is like an interesting one. It's like... It's a good finisher. And... It is a Planeswalker. And it can also create treasures, so it can help you achieve Concord later in the game. I think if we wanted to play a slower version of this deck, I think Iviana would be a good inclusion. So I'm going to go ahead and drop it in there. Now here we've got a lot of removal and stuff. I think Callum Weller is interesting to me. Because it's a removal spell that's also a Planeswalker. I think it's kind of unlikely that we want to play this, but yeah. Let's see here. Pumo, we got Lucian. Yeah, so we kind of already got a lot of the cards that are here that happen to make tokens, which is a little unfortunate. We got Prying Inquiry already. Temporary Treason is a good card. It's more of a sideboard card, though, I think. We already got Weave from Chaff. I think Endless Discoveries in its current form is a reasonable inclusion. After the nerf, I'm not super sold on it, but I could see it. I think Dark Bargain is also a reasonable permanent-based form of card draw, so I'm going to go ahead and throw it in there. Let's see here. Now, we also will need creatures, so if we wanted to go the green route, I would probably run like a Mana Ascetic or a Kaine's Devoted. Probably Kaine's Devoted, actually. Just so like you can make the... And making the Colossus uncounterable is actually a pretty big game. So if we wanted to... So I can see a couple different routes here. We could do the blue-green, like, super ramp. And maybe add a third color, and that would be pretty easy. We could do a base blue control deck that runs either blue or runs either black or red as the second color. Those are the two options that I think are most appealing to me. I'm going to try going into the more, like, rampy, combo-y blue-green version, because that is the version that, like, is more true to, like, our original plan. I think if we were running blue-green, we'd probably splash... With these available cards, we'd probably splash red for Iviana, because this is pretty good to ramp into. Sivian is okay. Also, Secret Elizabeth is a good reason to have a red splash as well. So I'm going to go ahead and... I think we're going to lock in blue-green splashing red. So we're going to cut all the cards that don't really fit for that. So Dark Bargain is gone. Let's see, Altar, Rapture, Inquiry. Zavid can go. SM can go. Alright, so now we do want to just have some generic cards that can ramp. I think at this point, I'm going to put in Elvish Opportunist. I'm also going to put in Kaine's Devoted. I think this deck is going to be pretty solid at just like, when it does go off, it's going to be ramping super hard. These are just some like preliminary numbers. I'm not going to like super lock these in. Now, ideally, we want this whole deck to be like everything either makes a permanent or is a permanent. And ideally, as many things as possible can make two types. So right now we've got Intrepid, which is an artifact and can be a creature on turn 4. We've got Elvish Opportunist, which can bring you an artifact and a creature, and to help you ramp out into the Seismic Colossus. Kaine's Devoted is just a creature, but it does ramp you out. Lets you cast Intrepid early, lets you cast Volta Hearth early, and it can also make your Colossus uncounterable. And Sights Beyond and Colossus are one of the payoffs. So everything here seems like a pretty locked slot for now. At least like in terms of being in the deck. The numbers can be negotiated later. Elegant Strike is probably going to be cut. I do like Wilted Lotus. I think right now we probably need another Planeswalker, actually, because we only have Volta right now. I'm looking at Iviana, actually, because Iviana is pretty solid to ramp out, and we have lots of ways to get fast mana. And then Iviana can also help us draw cards, and can be a win condition in herself. I'm going to run 2 Iviana here. I think that's a pretty solid number. Okay, so we're looking at the rest of these cards. Secret Elizabeth is an interesting one. Another card, since we're actually running a fairly different number. Okay, so what we want right now is a certain like 2-drop. And a card that I actually have in mind is Performer of Growth. I think this card is quite good. And I have tried Performer of Growth before with Seismic Colossus because it can help you ramp out the Colossus, and it also, like, having a 5-cost spell that you cast for just 4 makes it super easy to get the Performer of Growth online. So in case you didn't know what Performer of Growth does, it's a mana dork, and then when you use its mana to cast a spell with converted mana cost 5 or greater, it transforms into this monstrosity. So yeah, very good card. I'm not going to lock it into the deck just yet, but I think it's worth considering. I also think at this point, Yikin's Portal is pretty much going to get dropped. I also think Neolithic Golem is not really worth running. So, because our deck is going to need a fair bit of green if we're running like these early drops. I think Wilted Lotus should probably be considered in some capacity. Okay, so let's see. We need some more enchantments, because right now we only have Sights Beyond. And we need some more Planeswalkers. Like, maybe like 1 or 2 more Planeswalkers, but we definitely need more enchantments. So, it's hard to say, like, what I should run enchantment-wise. I think, in this pile, we only have Endless Discoveries. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to see if there's anything that makes enchantment tokens. So first of all, I know that now that we have colors, we're going to lock it down to being within our colors, and then we're going to... I know there's a mechanic called Adjudicate that can make enchantment tokens, so I'm going to check that one first. Okay, so this card is not good. We're mostly going to be looking for blue ones. Blue or green. Oracle of Edicts. No, it seems not good. Well, it's not. No, I'm going to say no. Repel the Unruly. Scrivener of Shaiv. Shaiv Scout. Plot Police. Yeah, okay. So, we're not really hitting anything. I think what I want to do next is I want to see if there's anything that creates an enchantment token. So we're going to do create an enchantment. Obviously, so we have the Aura Shapers, right? This is too expensive. I'm actually just going to start by converting mana cost, just to make it easier. This card does do those things, but we don't really want to run a random 1-mana 1/2. Bloodied Blade, no. Contempt for the Unnatural is not really what we want. Hunter's Hideout is interesting to me. It doesn't actually create enchantment tokens, but it is an enchantment, and it is like fairly good. The problem with that is that we don't really have ways to dredge. I think I'm going to pass on the Hunter's Hideout because I just don't really see like us enabling the second ability very much. Petal Scatterer is actually quite interesting. It is a creature, and it makes an enchantment token. The card does ramp. It also gets buffed for each non-creature, non-land permanent you control, which we are running a fair number of. We have Wilted Lotus, Sights Beyond, Intrepid, Bolt of Hearth, Ibiana. I actually think this card is a fairly decent inclusion. I'm going to go ahead and throw in Petal Scatterer. Alright. Saddlesword Guide, Whisper's Phoenix. Okay, I think we're starting to get into the cards that are like just too expensive for us to consider. Yeah. Okay, so Petal Scatterer was a pretty interesting find. I definitely think like we need a little bit more. Maybe we should just look into enchantments that can be run. Endless Disco is something. I think our deck is actually going to be leaning more towards green at this point. So, kind of unlikely that we want too many Endless Disco. I'm actually just going to look for green enchantments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say color identity is green, type is enchantment, and I'm going to limit it to non-commons. Okay, I'm also going to start by converting mana cost. So ideally we want enchantments that can... I think Strange Discovery is interesting. It's probably not really what we want though. A little too slow. Tenacious Brawler. I actually think Unexplored Regions is a pretty decent inclusion. It cantrips, it's cheap, and it helps us get our mana. So I think this is actually a pretty solid inclusion. I'm gonna go ahead and throw that in there. Alright, Burden Cloak. No. So Artie Study has fallen a little bit from its former glory. I think this version is probably not really something we want. Probably not. But I'm going to throw it in there anyway. It's still not the worst thing ever to do this. I kind of like this art more. Alright. Bestial Harmony, not really what we want. Curse of Vulnerability, Expansive Growth. Journey through Masamori. Kiss of the Dryad. Natural Recycling. Pecking Order. This is an interesting one. I don't really see the world in which we want to spend 2 mana on this and then like spend another green mana to like look for another thing. I think this is pretty unlikely. Prismatic Leyline. Now this is an enchantment, it does ramp. It's not out of the question. Which art do I like more? I think I like this one more. Alright. Rain's being new life. I don't really want this. Right to challenge. Some Days Autumn is actually a good inclusion, given that we're now mostly green. Let me go ahead and throw that in there. Okay. She's in 1,000 Steps. Okay, so yeah, I think it's pretty unlikely that we want a green enchantment that costs 3 at this point. This one is interesting. I think I'm probably gonna pass on it though. Yeah, okay. I haven't really been impressed with any of these cards, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna look for blue ones too, just to be safe. I'm also gonna open up to green-blue enchantments. I'm only gonna look for the cheap ones though. Exclusive Heist is pretty funny. I don't think this is something we want, unfortunately. This card is quite funny. I have seen this before. We're not really enough Planeswalkers to make it work, though. Precarious Ledgers. This is interesting, actually. How many cards are we running that will trigger it right now? Potentially 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I think this is a little too not really what we want, unfortunately. Okay, favor of the court, favorable ones for 1 column. This one actually provides both an artifact and an enchantment. I think I missed this one earlier. It's not the worst. It's possible that we just want Endless Disco. I think this is pretty not what we want. Okay, I think the Sabne's Autumn is actually probably the best inclusion here. How many of these are non-creature? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, I think, yeah, I think Union Rail is probably going to be good here. And we're going to finish it up with... I think Performer of Growth is a little too restrictive. we already have enough. Actually, we don't have a ton of ramp. I'm not sure. The Petal Scatterer or the triple green is going to be a little prohibitive. I'm interested if there's another Planeswalker we might want to run. Just looking for generic Planeswalkers. I always forget this would be converted mana cost. Artie's not really what we want. Cypress, Alexa. I think unfortunately most of these are not going to be what we want. I know Helene Trant is a card that I'm considering. Okay, we'll put in a couple of Helene Trant. Alright, so this is 36 cards right here. Do I love it? I don't love it. I think when I look at the hidden cards, the cards that I really think might have been interesting are... Cut that. I don't think we really needed this. This is probably a sideboard option. Need that. So the cards that I'm most thinking I might want to fit these in are Unexplored Regions, Endless Discoveries, Secret Elizabeth, and Performer of Growth. So right now, let's see what combinations we can hit Concord by turn 4 on, right? If we go turn 1 Sights Beyond, our best option is to go Universal Strike Breaker into anything after that, right? Ideally, we want to have one of our mana dorks on turn 1. I actually think this deck probably wants an additional 2 mana dorks. Although Wilted Lotus does ramp, so maybe not. I think the problem with having that is it could just be too many creatures. I'm actually fairly happy with how this looks right now. All these cards are decent enough that I don't feel too bad about including any of them in the deck. And the deck has a pretty clear plan of ramp into Planeswalkers plus Seismic Colossus, so I don't think it's too big a deal. I'm gonna go ahead and remove these from the maybe board, and we're gonna lock in that as our main deck. If we decide that we wanted to potentially change this, I would revisit those cards, but now we're just going to focus on the mana base and then the sideboard. So when I build a mana base, I'm looking at what cards I need to cast early, because that is the most important time when you need your mana base to be online. So right now I want to either have green or blue on turn 1, I want to have double green on turn 2, or single blue. So our mana base is going to definitely lean towards green, because our green drops are more needed on turn 1. But we also do need to produce double blue, and we need to produce red as well, which is not too bad. A very good tool for building mana bases is the Compendium. They have all the duels you need with all the names, just kind of right out there, so you don't have to remember anything. Right off the bat, I think the most important thing to have is fetches, especially in decks that are more than 2 colors. So I think we right away, Mysterious Cataract is a very good conclusion. Whoops. What is going on with my typing today? Okay, so we got Mysterious Cataract. I'm just going to include 1 copy of every land that I want to include until I decide the numbers later. So the other 2 fetches that are on color for us are Magmatic Torrent and Timber Range. Now, I think Magmatic Torrent is unlikely to be needed, because usually, our early plays are going to be wanting green, right? And then if we don't want green, we probably want blue. Or rather, I should phrase this differently. If we don't, okay, actually, I am 100% wrong. You don't need the early fetch for red. You'd rather have the early fetch for blue. So, Mysterious Cataract or Magmatic Torrent is. You know what? Well, okay. I am tired. I will. This is what happens when you think out loud. I'll include both of them for now, and I'll think more about which ones I want later. Now, once we're done with fetches, you definitely want like at least a couple of. Lush Oasis is definitely going to be the one that we want the most copies of because it produces our 2 primary colors. I think, given that you're probably going to be early fetching for a forest most of the time, having something like Flourishing Crevice is going to be a lot easier to turn on than Frostfire Geysers. So I'm going to have 1 Flourishing Crevice. It's unlikely that we'll have like most of the time if we're fetching a basic, it's going to be a forest, which is my reasoning. But that means that Crystal Cavern is going to be preferable here because if we get a forest plus Crystal Cavern, that enables us to better cast what we want. Alright. Also, we definitely want Shifting Glade. I am not good at typing. Oh my goodness. Okay, so now we've got, I think most decks don't really want to be doing the deserts, I think. And the reason for that is that MSEM decks that have like reasonable mana constraints, as in like not too difficult mana constraints, they can afford to cast their spells on time without needing to pay life sometimes. So that's why the deserts are. I think they're usually better if you are playing like a shit ton of colors, and you just want to make sure that like you're willing to pay the life. Like for example, I think the deserts are definitely much more preferable in like 6,000 J's deck, and it also turns Unending Sands into a very, very good fetch. So let's see here. We don't really want these. The cycle duels. Honestly, these don't go into many decks I make. They definitely don't go into this one because you really want to be able to cast your 1-drops on turn 1. Okay, I think these are pretty not super relevant to the deck, given that we're running fetches. The reveal lands as well. We don't really need these. These are going to be a lot better in like 2-color decks. Okay, so beyond that, I think Wayfarer's Shrine is a pretty solid inclusion. Lets you hit any of your 3 colors. Basics are also really important to making the other duels work. So we're going to be running Wayfarer's Shrine. I personally like this Wayfarer's Shrine. I think so. The mono fetches are pretty interesting. They're pretty hard to play correctly in most games because like there's actually a lot of flexibility involved with being able to just use them for the mana, and they're no longer good enough where it's like, oh, you just want these over the shock fetches every game. So generally, I only include mono fetches if it's like if fetching them for their basic is like a play you want to make a lot of the time. So I think Tropical Grove is probably a reasonable inclusion here, because we do have the early Kinase devoted. We want Elvish Opportunist, 7 Days Autumn. I think Tropical Grove is probably worth it as a 1 over 2 of. Something like Gleaming River is not though. Yeah. Okay. Besides this, we're running a Wanderlust mana base, so I don't think that Palace of Reflections is going to be good. But I do think Palace of Reflections is underrated. Okay, so it's nice to have a fetchable manland in the deck, so I'm going to put in a Lumbering Hillock. This also helps because it's a good card to fetch with your what's it called? Tropical Grove, yeah. Besides that, we're also going to run Monument of Queens, because Monument is great to fetch with Intrepid, and we may have a lot of extra mana. Out of these lands, I think having these lands is good a lot of the time. In particular, these two are very, very strong. I think we're not going to be really like going off with Seas ever, so I'm not going to include it. Ryan is interesting to me. I think I'm not going to include it because we don't want too many tapped lands that can't cast our 1-drops. I think Nebula of Empty Gold is a reasonable pick. See if I want that. Besides that, I don't really see any of these that like Precursor Sanctum is interesting. I actually think Precursor Sanctum could be decent too. Alright, so we got this big pile of lands, right? Now we gotta figure out what are the most important lands that we might want to run 4 of. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is the Cataract. This will fetch almost every land that we want at any point in the game. Besides that, we're gonna be wanting to do like the 1-ofs that we definitely want to keep are Monument and Lumbering Hillock. Precursor Sanctum is open to being cut. I think of the fetches, actually we should figure out what our duels are before we want the fetches. Before we figure out whether we want the fetches. So usually Lush Oasis is our main duel, and I think this should go up to 3 copies. Oops, I accidentally did 2. Lucky deck builders takes a little bit of getting used to sometimes. So besides that, I think that having 1 copy of the more fringe duels like Crystal Cavern, Flourishing Crevice is good. Given that we actually have Tropical Grove, it's possible that we want to switch this for... Actually, no, that's fine. So, I actually think this Precursor Sanctum is not going to fit in the deck. And it's not like, these are not exactly like the biggest things to drop with the Precursor Sanctum, so I'm gonna take it out. Where is it? There it is. Okay. Now, besides that, we also definitely are going to want some basics. I'm feeling the Glacier basics today. We definitely want at least 1 of each, because we are running Wayfarer's Shrine. Alright. Also want more than 1 forest. I think 2 island, 1 mountain. Actually, we want to switch that out for a snow-covered forest. Yeah, okay. So we got all these funky lands. I think at this point we actually don't need Nebula. Our mana constraints are not too crazy, and we have a lot of ways to filter, so I don't feel too bad about it. As for the duels, I think an extra Shifting Glade is good. The duels that we do have now are Crystal Cavern, Flourishing Crevice, Shifting Glade, Lush Oasis. Seems pretty good. I'm going to have 1 extra Tropical Grove. I'm going to cut Magmatic Torrent because it's possible that we could end up without a basic to fetch with it. Also, Magmatic Torrent, if we want to cast a green 1-drop on turn 1, then we'd have to get... okay, so this is the thought that I was trying to express earlier, is that if you have Magmatic Torrent and you want to cast your Kaine's Devoted, you need to get a Shifting Glade, right? And if you had Timber Range and you wanted to cast Sights Beyond, you would have to get Crystal Cavern, right? But it's more likely that you get the former than the latter. So we want to cut the card that gives you the worst situation more often, if that makes sense. Okay. Anything extra Wayfarer's Shrine is good? I actually think there is room for Precursor Sanctum, now that I think about it. And the last card we're going to include is probably an extra Timber Range. Yeah, okay. So I'm pretty happy with this main deck. Real quick, I want to go over my philosophy on number of cards, because I think I kind of auto filtered this without really thinking about it, but I'll explain my reasoning for why I put these numbers the way that I did. So whenever you put a card in your deck, you have an option to put 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0 copies in your deck, right? Now obviously the 0 is kind of a meme. Like we have infinite number of zero inclusions in our deck. So let's start with 4. So if a card is a 4 of in your deck, it means that it's a card that you want to see as often as possible. It's a card that you want to draw at every game, first of all, but oftentimes you draw multiple copies of your 4 ofs. So it has to be something that you're okay with drawing 3 copies of, you know, like, because that will happen a decent amount of time. So if I look at like Sights Beyond, I'm okay with drawing 3 Sights Beyond. If you actually have your Concord activated, having like drawing multiple extra cards a turn is insane. I could see the argument for why Sights Beyond maybe shouldn't be a 4 of, just because, like, if you have multiple Sights Beyond, it probably makes you less likely to actually have Concord. So that's a consideration. I think we'd have to test the deck to see. This one could possibly go down to 3 copies. Wilted Lotus is a 4 of because it ramps you, it gets your Concord fixed, it draws you cards, does everything you want. If I draw 3 copies of this, I'm very happy. Kindness Devoted. Now, Mana Dorks are kind of usually an exception to the are you okay with drawing 3 copies rule, because Mana Dorks are cards that you want to have as early as possible in the game, as often as possible. So usually if you're running a Mana Dork, you're going to run 4 copies of it, because it's much less of a strong draw in the late game. And that's kind of a trade-off you make, right? Elvish Opportunist, I think, is like in a similar boat. But I could also see this going down to 3. Saturn's Autumn is something we would want to draw most of the time. It's an enchantment, and then it can also transform into a creature. This is actually one other thing that I want to note, is that we want our deck to have a lot of forests. Right now, the number of forests we can potentially put into play is Lush Oasis, Shifting Glade, Flourishing Crevice, and yeah, so like it's not a ton. We do have Lumbering Hillock too, so it's possible we need to like fiddle around with the mana base a little bit more to make Saturn's Autumn like easier to activate. That's something I'll think about after I play the deck a little bit. Strikebreaker is a 3 of because if you draw 4 of it, you're probably not going to have as many spells to actually cast. Intrepid is a 3 of because it's legendary. If you draw 3 of it, you're sad. Helene Trant is a 2 of. So, yeah, actually I should go into why I didn't explain exactly why you want 3 of. So a 3 of is a card that you want to draw like an average of once every game. You know, like you want to see it, but you don't want to see 2 copies of it. Now, if you look at a 2 of, it's a card that you want to see about in half your games. I definitely don't want Helene Trant every game because, like, in the games where you're not ahead, she's not very good. But if you are ahead, she's a very strong card. So if you ramp her early, really, really solid. So that's why, and it's also a legendary card, so that makes it harder too. Volta Hearth is a card we want like every game. Does a lot for enabling Concord, but multiple copies is bad. So yeah, most Planeswalkers you'll see like 3 copies. That's why. Ibiana is an expensive card, so definitely don't want 4. And you want to see this about every once in a while. You know, be able to hit your bomb. Could have a really big game impact when it does show up. Finally, Seismic Colossus is like one of the main cards you build your deck around. If you draw 3 of these and you enable Concord, you probably won the game. So yeah, seems good. All right, so we got this deck. When we build a sideboard, one thing I want to note is that this deck's pretty weak on interaction. So I want to include cards that can help me interact with my opponent, while also not interfering with my deck's overall plan to make sure it still functions efficiently. So one card I already put in here is still the Pandemonium. I think this is reasonable. It might be a little hard to cast the double blue early, but I think if you have it in your hand, you'll probably be able to set up your mana base in a way that it does work. So I'm gonna have 3 copies of this. Now, when I look for sideboard cards, I'm usually looking for cards that are just like kind of generic at first. Once I've played the deck more, I get a bigger sense of like what it needs, and what cards it needs to side out in what matchups. So for now, I'm just gonna look for some generic cards that can be good. But this is not the way you should build like the most effective sideboard, right? Okay. So I'm looking up here. Generally, I think it's hard to go wrong with 4 stand unassailable in your sideboard. Bringing these in against an aggressive deck is usually going to do wonders. I'm going to put 4 of those in there. I also think Unbreachable Walls is actually a card that I'm interested in running, because if you're running it against a deck like Pithwilt, you can get pretty messed up if they remove like one of your permanents and leave you just off Concord. So if you can play a little slower and just hold up the Unbreachable Walls, this could be a really good way to actually like, you know, mess with those villainy decks a little bit. I think Titan Snare is pretty bad for us. Doesn't let us cast Seismic Colossus. We do want Graveyard Hate, especially in this new age of dredge decks, so I'm going to put in 4 Cold Grave. The last thing we need is I'm actually going to run like 1 Temporary Treason. I may actually want multiple copies of this, and maybe Still the Pandemonium, like Unbreachable Walls kind of does the Still the Pandemonium job. So I'm going to put it at this. I think this is a pretty reasonable sideboard. Okay, so I'm going to save this deck. See, I'm just going to call it. So I named meta decks like this is because I have a bunch of net decks, like just from seeing other people's decks saved too, so I want to make sure that I have a way to tell which decks I made and which decks I didn't make. Okay, so we're going to save that. Alright, so this has been my first like MSEM content piece, so I want feedback. What do people like? What do people don't like? About like me, like my way of speaking in particular, my way of breaking everything down, and then also like about the style of content. Like, do you want to see more videos like this? More videos of just kind of like stream of consciousness deck building? I actually don't know how long this has been. I'm guessing maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, which is actually kind of long. So thanks for sticking it out all the way if you did. Hope you found this enjoyable. Peace out. Thanks for listening.